All right, today's class was about home inspections, what to expect when you inspect. Tommy shared a ton of tips. He covered a lot of core items. Tommy, what were some of those items?
The biggest thing is the home inspection actually starts the very first time you meet your buyer. So communicating fair expectations to them so they're not surprised by things later. And there's a whole lot of good tricks and tips here of you being the home inspector even before you hire a home inspector, that will just set you up for success down the road. So
enjoy. Keep going. I think the biggest benefit you have today, it's certainly not me. I think it's Tommy, and I think the biggest benefit there is you've got somebody here that's seen a lot of transactions, a lot of listings, a lot of buyer deals, a lot of contracts, a lot of home inspections, right? And so if I think about someone that I would want to learn from, whether I was a year in the business or 5 years in the business, it's someone that has been there and done that a lot. And so he's going to bring some stuff to the table today, and I'm going to try not to mess the rest of it up.
Yeah, and actually I'm going to solicit a lot of the experience and expertise in this room, because collectively we know a whole lot about a whole lot of home inspections. But home inspections is a pretty huge topic to go into. And I thought we'd kind of start, who's been in the business, I don't know, more than like 20 years? All right, good. One of the things that I've always thought is a little bit interesting is property inspections or home inspections haven't always been around. I mean, in essence, it's almost kind of a newer thing that you're actually fully allowed to do this complete home inspection before you move towards a closing. And it's even somewhat unique even in our market, where I've seen some Outer Banks beach house contracts where you have to pay essentially feasibility dues. Like, you have to pay a check straight to the seller. It can be $5,000, $10,000 straight to the seller to even be allowed to conduct a home inspection. And if you don't move forward with the sale, guess where that money is? Sitting in the seller's bank account already. Like, you write the check right there on the spot. And so this is a pretty kind of newer thing, grand scheme of things, but it's also pretty unique to real estate. What else have you ever purchased where you've done a full-on professional inspection of something? Name an item that you do a full-on professional inspection of before you purchase.
Boat, big boat.
Boat, probably a big boat, okay. So you would hire a professional mechanic to come through, okay?
You just survey. They do a survey.
Huh?
Survey.
That's what it's called, a survey. All right, yeah, what else?
A horse.
A horse, so I'm assuming that's a veterinarian that does that or something?
It's pretty small.
Yeah. So it seems like a pretty short list so far. I mean, even a car, like you go to CarMax or whatnot, you're trusting that it's in good shape, but you're not exactly hiring a professional to do a very thorough inspection. And so so it's fairly unique to our industry, and it's a pretty neat benefit for the most part. So here's the first question. When does the home inspection take place? When does the home inspection take place?
10 or 14 days after ratification.
10 to 14 days after ratification. All right, what else? Who else has an idea of when the inspection takes place? What's it?
When you get it scheduled.
When you get it scheduled, yeah.
In today's market, sometimes it takes place at the time of the showing.
Yep, at the time of the showing. And so that's a little bit of what we're going to get into. I mean, we would potentially argue that really the inspection period, or the discussions on inspections, starts way before that. So much so that it even starts at the beginning of your first introduction with the person at like a buyer's consult. And so Larry's going to kind of talk about that part, and then the way we're going to split up our conversation today is essentially before the quote-unquote inspection, during the inspection, and then what do you do kind of after the inspection. So this would be like the before part.
Right. I've always thought of a listing presentation or a buyer consult as the way to establish control and determine who has it, right? Maybe your buyer or seller does have some control, but I think ideally, if we're guiding people the right way, we want to at least feel like we have control. So typically at a buyer consult, I'm going to sit down that very first day, and one of the things that we're going to spend probably 5 or 10 minutes talking about is the home inspection. We're going to clarify what it is. We're going to clarify what a home inspection item is. We're going to clarify what a home inspection item isn't. What I try to do, and if you were in the class last week, we talked a little bit about this. I try to give them analogies that help their brain process when things get a little bit more stressful than they are at that consult. Consults are fun, or they should be, and you guys should be making them fun. Sometimes after they've seen a few houses and they've lost out on them, if you're just now talking to them about a home inspection or the ins and outs of it, you're catching them at a stressful time. So the first tip is catch them when vibes are good, right? And clarify what a home inspection is, right? To use Kevin's analogy, it's essentially like buying a used car, expecting some dents and dings, right? Not expecting dents and dings. You want to custom build a home if we go that route, and we'll need to, consult the lender to check those numbers out. I think for me, I use the analogy, a health analogy. We're very concerned about the bones and organs of a home, and I'm gonna be conducting an unofficial inspection at every home we visit. I can do that because I've got a construction background. I was a project manager for a few years. Whatever you cultivate that makes you a professional in that regard, you need to let them know that they're in good hands, but it does start at the buyer's consult. So 2 pages out of our purchasing pathway packet reference the home inspection so that they can understand what a cosmetic defect is versus what something we really should ask for. Roof, crawl space, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, or safety. Those are things that when you go to the seller, you've got a pretty good chance of getting those taken care of in a non-multiple offer situation, because the expectation is that seller's probably gonna have to do those items for most every buyer. Where if you're asking for cosmetics, you're almost asking that seller to go find another buyer. Another thing that Tommy and I talked about knowing is really not necessarily at that console, but at your showing, you need to have a ballpark idea of what things cost. You don't need to be a contractor, and you really shouldn't put that hat on too much. But it is good to learn from contractors and inspectors so that you can give ballpark estimates, and Tommy and I will elaborate on that as we go along a little bit. Again, interactive class here, we want participation. What are some common home inspection items?
No GFCI indicator.
Let's go, Ken.
Yeah, no tricks, yeah. Yeah, I usually joke with my clients that basically at this point, I can write an entire home inspection report without ever even seeing a house, because I can rattle off a whole lot of stuff that every single house has, and it's gonna show up on every inspection report. So what else comes to mind? No GFCI,
No Texas.
failed seals and windows, oh my gosh, drive me nuts.
Mildew, mold, crawl
Mold,
space.
fungi, something in the crawl
Double tap
space.
electrical.
Oh,
Yep, double tap, double lug,
Dirty HVAC filter, you need to get it serviced.
some
All
HVAC
day.
servicing, loose toilets,
Oh.
yeah, loose toilets,
Reverse polarity in the outlets.
reverse polarity.
Ungrounded outlets.
Probably fallen insulation somewhere in a crawl space. Anything else you kind of basically, you're gonna see almost on every single house.
If you use a house on a rock, then you have mismatched breakers that
Breakers.
don't match the panel.
Mismatch breakers.
It's terrible. The thing to do there is run out of the house before it blows up.
Yeah. Manufacturers recommend. I also really love kind of sharing story. So I guess to backtrack a little bit, communicating proper expectations is really huge on every part of the real estate business. And so I always tell my clients, where I've been successful in real estate is that I'm really good at communicating fair expectations on the front end so that you're not surprised later, because a surprise for you isn't good for me. It's not good for me to be surprised, not good for anybody to be surprised. So fair expectations are, you're going to have some stuff come up on home inspection. Even with the new construction homes, I sell have some issues. And so if you're saying that at the buyer console, then they're not having this idea in their mind of, I'm gonna move into a perfect house and there's not gonna be any issues. So I do lots of stuff with communicating those expectations, but I also do some storytelling, right? Stories always help. And so one of the easiest stories I have is I had a client who we were selling their house and we were buying a house, and the house that we were buying, the home inspector found some mold, trigger word, mold in the crawl space, that basically the vapor barrier was disheveled and needed to be straightened out, and maybe some insulation put up. And when she saw that on the inspection report, she's like, oh my gosh, this is a big, they have to fix this. This is a deal breaker. I am highly allergic to to mold, and this is a deal breaker. This has to be fixed. And I was like, well, every house has like a vapor barrier that's not all the way to the edges, and like like this was a normal moderate level of mold in the crawl space, and she was hot about it. And I was like, well, look, this is, pretty normal. And I try to kind of lead the conversation. I was like, chances are, your house, might have some of the same stuff. Well, sure enough, the home inspection on the house we were selling was a couple days later. Guess what they found in the crawl space? A little bit of mold or fungus and a disheveled vapor barrier. And so when we had asked for the vapor barrier to get all fixed, she was outraged that the buyers asked for her vapor barrier to get fixed, and I reminded her, hey, remember, I don't know, 3 days ago, when you were outraged saying this person had to do it. And so I use that story a whole lot to communicate expectations of, there's going to be some of these things that come up, but chances are it's common stuff that probably is existing in wherever you're living right here and now. So it's not necessarily something that you're gonna wake up tomorrow and kind of call a contractor for. And so I think we kind of hit on, anything else jump to mind of something that you see almost on every single house?
The siding is always rotted siding.
Yeah, some sort of siding, some wood rot maybe. Yeah, so there's gonna be some things that, the reality is when I tell folks is, there should be, hopefully a seller has taken care of, certain things. So really the things we should be asking for, it should almost be something that a seller was surprised by, like that they didn't know, like it's new information. And so that's kind of the before. I'm trying to think of anything else. We'll go into the, I guess the during.
Well, the biggest things.
Yeah, I had another thing too.
Got it. The biggest things are to remember that we have to normalize things that are common, but you can't normalize what you don't know, right? And we'll give you some tips as we go along on how to gain the knowledge and experience, even if you don't necessarily have the home inspections to do. We'll cover that here in just a little bit. What'd you have?
Yeah, and so with that too, even if you haven't been a part of 100 home inspections, chances are collectively the people around your office have had 100 home inspections. And so I think I stole this from Kevin when he was saying he was starting out, is he looked at other people's inspection reports. So you don't necessarily have to go sit and watch 100 home inspections, but you could gather 100 inspection reports from fellow agents, and you could look at the summary pages of all those different reports. And you could ask somebody specifically, hey, do you have a new construction inspection report? That way you can have a story with folks of like, hey, even new construction houses have issues with the deck and with the 4x4s not being notched and things supposedly not flashed correctly. Like, you can do all that stuff. Yeah, Mike.
Would you tell some of our new people to really help them with summary pages?
So, it all depends on the home inspector. So, it's usually a 30 to 40 page PDF document. Every inspector does it differently. The inspectors that I typically have worked with and liked usually have a summary page of 3 to 4. And so this was going to be, this is a tip that I kind of share a little bit later on, but again, kind of going to that proper expectations even from the very beginning of a buyer consult is I tell folks, look, when you get the inspection report, it's going to be 30 to 40 pages of pictures and notes and good information about the house, like where the water shutoff valve is. But mostly what we're looking at is that summary page, and it's going to be 3 or 4 pages of everything written in red, and it's going to be really scary and intimidating if you weren't actually at the house to ask the inspector, about these items. But there's going to be 3 or 4 pages of everything written in red, and I usually say, obviously we're not going to ask for everything on that report, but we're going to be looking at one of the big things, most pressing things that need to be addressed sooner rather than later. So that's what we're going to kind of focus on. Another little tip I give here is when I tell my clients is, the way that I like to look at it is if you lived in this house right now and you had somebody inspect your house, when are you waking up tomorrow and kind of calling a contractor about? Not when are you going to keep an eye on for the next 5 or 10 years. So, if you kind of give them that perspective, it somewhat changes their thinking a little bit. So when there is a slightly broken seal in a window, everybody know what a broken seal in a window is. So thermal pane windows, two pieces of glass. Inspectors love to write up that there's a broken seal, which is a little bit of moisture has gotten in between those two panes. A lot of inspectors get a lot of slack on this because it's really more like a cosmetic thing, but they would argue that it changes the energy efficiency of it, so therefore they're allowed to call it a defect. But usually I make a joke with my clients, if you know darn well you're not waking up tomorrow to spend hundreds of dollars on windows over a broken seal, if you were writing that check, you're gonna keep an eye on that thing so it's so hazy that you can't even see out of it anymore. So it's a little unreasonable to to expect or dictate a seller to repair those items. And the other thing too, just future reference for windows is windows typically take a while to get back and usually take longer than you can actually get closed. And so usually that's gonna be a repair that doesn't even get done before closing, so they have to figure out escrowing money and getting a contractor to do it after the fact. And so some different nuances there with windows, but
Well, that brings us to a pretty good part too, to wrap up something to cover at a buyer consult in terms of expectation setting, and that's finding out if your client is adamant about having repairs made or if they'd be open to a credit in lieu of repairs. In my experience, and Tommy kind of echoed this, we both feel like most sellers actually would rather give a credit than actually making repairs and paying for the repairs and all of that. The big thing, maybe that's the fear barrier for them, is they just don't know what that number looks like, and in their head it's like $25,000 or something. When you educate and clarify, and you know on average what items cost, you can kind of help them normalize that and understand that it might be the best and most efficient route for everybody involved. Benjamin, you have something?
Yeah, kind of going along with what you're saying in terms of the prep consult and all that kind of stuff and normalizing it. It's really important that as realtors in the situation, we understand that those clients, they're responding off of emotion for everything. It's our job to meet their emotion in regards to being excited and happy, but also adding in a few doses of logic and letting them know in that consult that that's my job, is to be the logical one, because it is going to be at times for you very emotional.
Sure.
And I understand that, you know?
Yeah.
Because if you notice, like, if you guys ever been in a situation where, like, if I talk to somebody else who just bought a house, maybe it was a friend that's out of state, or someone in the area that used another realtor, or someone on my team that I wasn't involved, and they talk about the home inspection, they're not nearly as heated about it talking to a third party as they would be to their realtor.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's
Absolutely.
even to the client, it's never actually that big of a deal unless they're talking to their realtor, because their realtor usually hasn't done a good job preparing them for it.
Right. And they filled in a lot of blanks themselves. The realtors kind of lost control. Think about that. How do you get through repair addendum negotiations when that's kind of how you're starting? So I think what we can give you today is a way to know when to start, how to start, what to do, and then when you get there, you're like, wow, all this stuff works pretty good, you know?
yeah, that makes me think there's also a danger in soft playing it too much. Right? Like, I'm not saying don't ask for anything, don't ask for any money, but you need to know what's normal and being able to communicate and educate your clients of double lug neutrals is literally a screwdriver and moving one wire down a peg. Like, it's not your house is gonna catch on fire. That's kind of basically how electricians do it by practice. It's just, there's a better way of doing it. So it's not soft playing either. And so for me, I kind of always couple of, I pick on windows a lot. I say, certainly if there's anything leaking or wood rotting, that's only going to get worse, every single day that goes by. So we're definitely gonna be asking for that stuff. And so you have to kind of make sure you're looking out for their best interest, but the only way you know if you're looking out for the best interest is what's kind of normal and what's not. But also then, it goes back to those expectations on the front end of letting folks know there's no such thing as a perfect house, which this was a conversation I had with Larry, because I was a little bit worried. There could be a difference of opinion, so I'll kind of pose it to the group. I usually talk about the 3 or 4 pages, and we're gonna pick out the most pressing things. Who would potentially argue back of saying, well, why would you ever do that? Why would you not just ask for everything? Who would ask for everything? Okay, it must not be hometown agents, because I get on every single listing I have. Every listing I have, I get just a copy and paste of the entire thing, so yeah.
It would depend on if it was 2014 or 2022 for me.
Well, let's even say it's 2014. Who would say, no, just copy and paste the whole thing? Anybody wanna stick their neck out on that one.
New agents who
Somebody-
don't know any better.
somebody trying to get out.
Might be-
See too much.
It's all the agents who aren't in this class, maybe. But, you know, so I was a little bit worried that people are like, oh yeah, of course, like, you just copy and paste everything, and then you make the other agent figure out what they actually wanna do, and then there's a whole bunch of back and forth. So, you know, typically the way I talk to my clients about that is, hey, you know, obviously we're not gonna ask for everything on this, cause if we just kinda copy and paste everything, the seller's not really gonna know what's important to us, and guess what they're gonna do? They're gonna cross through all the crap that they don't wanna do, and they're only gonna do, you know, the easy stuff or the stuff that they want to do, and then we're gonna have to go back and say, oh, well, no, I didn't really want that done, but I really wanted this done, can we swap this for that? And you kind of go back and forth a whole bunch, where I tell my clients traditionally, it's a pretty straightforward process, where if you make reasonable requests, the seller responds back reasonably. And winning with words, saying reasonable. So, because nobody wants to be perceived as unreasonable, right? So you remind your buyer that if you make reasonable requests, and you kind of help them know what a reasonable request is. And so, so that's a lot on like the buyer consult as your first meeting with a client. I would say you're not gonna copy and paste the whole thing. Just like if a house was listed for 300, you're not gonna offer $200,000 on it. Like it's not the best practice. Now this next stage we'll be talking about like literally, well, I guess it's still considered before, but now I'm thinking about at the showing. And this part I think is gonna be huge, because in this market, I'm always talking to my team every single week of what's winning offers and are you losing offers, how many offers are you competing against, and I mean, goodness, at this point I think unless you're waiving inspection altogether, you're likely not winning in any of these hot markets. And so that's a little bit of that current 2023 market, is it might be either waiving inspection altogether, like you don't get to come back to the house again until closing, or waiving a significant amount. This is where you really need to be skilled as an agent to help your buyers like during the showing. And so for me, at every single showing, I talk to my buyers every single time we're gonna be looking at windows, roof, siding, and HVAC. Those are our 4 big ticket items. Those are usually the most expensive components of the house. And we need to make sure that most of those are as new or updated as possible. And then I throw in a 5th of crawl space. And I usually tell folks crawl spaces are the other biggest things that kind of break and blow up deals. And so let's think about that. Windows, roof, siding, and heat pump. What are we looking for in windows? What type of problems with windows might there be? Okay,
Seals, do they
functionality.
open and close?
Do they open and close? Yeah.
Rotted wood,
Rotted wood. Other thoughts on windows? How much does a window cost? You're saying 400? What if you asked like Window World or anybody who advertises?
$9.99,
What if B&W builders? Guess how much they probably charge for windows?
$9.50. A lot.
Yeah, anybody who advertises, you know, by mail or whatever, it's probably $600, $700. I mean, $800 per window just for a typical double hung. Most of the contractors I'm talking with can replace the whole window, going from like essentially a wood window to a vinyl window for about $400. So you might want to keep that number in mind. I think that's still true with today's inflation, unless anybody wants to contradict me otherwise. What about a window sash? Like it's already a vinyl window, and the seal is broke, and you just need to reglaze the sash. How much does that cost?
125 at Budget Blind, or
Budget Glass. I have a receipt that I've saved in my favorites album. It's $85, but at this point it's pretty old. So you might have more up-to-date information. $125 just to kind of reglaze a window. So usually for me, when I'm talking about windows with my buyers, I just want to see vinyl windows. Now, sometimes there's some good replaced wood windows, but the thing that I remind my buyer clients is anything wood rots. And so we want things that don't rot. And so the problem with wood windows could be, unless they're wrapped in aluminum, is the water just kind of sits there, and sometimes I'll open the window for them and I'll say, you know, these windows are pretty good because they have a storm window, so you're protected. But the problem with storm windows is if you ever leave that storm window open, guess where the water goes and guess where it sits? It sits right there on that seal and eventually rots. You have to keep recaulking stuff, even with the aluminum, you know, siding over stuff, you have to keep it kind of recaulked. So for the most part, for me, I'm looking for vinyl windows. And if there's, and a lot of times houses, you know, the first floor might have replaced windows, but the second floor doesn't, or a bedroom has replaced windows and the second floor doesn't. But I'm personally and physically looking at almost all the windows and showing folks that that's a vinyl window versus a wood window. Now picture frame windows, the larger windows, anybody got a guess on how much those cost? Yeah, a picture frame window, like a bay window, like in a kitchen, probably at least $1,000. Probably more than that, depending on overall size. So those get even more expensive. Now with windows, for my big 4 ticket items, windows, roof, siding, heat pump, the thing I usually tell folks about windows is that's the lowest on my list because you can replace a window at a time, a floor at a time, you know, a room at a time, versus a roof. You have to replace the whole thing all at once. And so windows are kind of lower on that, but they can add up. You have 10 windows on a second floor house at $400 a window. That's $4,000 just for the second floor. All right, what about windows, roof? What are we looking for on a roof?
Functionality.
Functionality? Yeah, so you could look for leaks inside the house, right? Anybody have tips on what a water stain looks like?
Depends on how old it is, but yellow or brown.
They're usually circular. Yeah. Sometimes there's spots on the ceiling that aren't, you know, roof stains. Anybody know anything else about where a potential water stain from a roof could come from? Is it always the roof that's defective, or could be HVAC? Yeah, could have a drip pan and the air handlers up there. What else?
Pipe collars.
Pipe collars, yeah. So roof collars, basically any vent stack in the house has a roof collar, and this is my saying, and you guys need to correct me if I'm wrong, because I've just been saying these scripts for so long that I believe them all to be true. But I have told folks roof collars, they only last about 10 or so years. So the little seal dry rots and it cracks, and very easy for water to penetrate through there. So a roof collar is only good for about 10 or so years. How long is a roof good for? Longer than 10, right? So at a minimum, typically I would say a 3-tab shingle, very flat looking, they don't even make them anymore really. A very flat looking shingle is what most industry folks would call a 20-year shingle. So it's very flat, there's no dimension to it. So a 3-tab shingle would be about 20 years. Anything with some dimension traditionally is gonna be a 30-year. And at this point, they don't even call them years anymore, they just all have lifetime warranties. So for the most part, you can tell folks a roof lasts 20 to 30 years. From the street, for me, I go stand at the street or stand at the back of the house, depending on the elevation, I say, roof looks good. Like, for the most part, you can tell if the roof has just been replaced or if it's 20 to 30 years old. You can also look around the neighbors' houses and look at the other people's roofs. So a lot of times the houses were all built around the same time, and you can quickly kind of point out which house has been replaced and which roof hasn't. And then my favorite little trick in this, maybe you guys have heard me before, but there's another way that you can tell if the roof's been replaced from the inside of the house. Anybody know what it is?
More nails.
Yeah, good. So you can go up into the attic. So I definitely do this on a rainy day because I'm not gonna stand out in the street, looking at a roof. But on a rainy day or just in general, if you go up into the attic, this kind of only works if it's, I don't know, less than say 40 years old or 45 years old. But if you go up into the attic, for the most part, when they replace a roof, they peel off the old roof, right? And so they're pulling up all the old nails and all the old shingles and all the tar paper from the old roof, and they put on a new roof. So from inside the house, inside the attic, you can see old penetrated holes from the old nails that have then gotten ripped out. And then basically right next to those empty holes, you can see new nails pop through. And so then, at least that roof's been replaced once. So this is really good if the house is like, I don't know, let's say 25 years old, and you can't really tell are those new shingles or old shingles. But you can go into the attic and be like, well, either they double layered, which you would probably see just because there's a whole lot of nails, or they never replaced the roof. The other thing too, every time I'm meeting with a buyer at a house talking about windows, roof, siding, heat pump, and crawl space, is I don't trust a listing agent at all. You know, you can very loosely define a new roof. So a new roof could be 10 years.
Newer.
Yeah, newer. You know, watch out for those newer windows and newer HVAC. So I never trust them at all. I always look for it kind of myself. So a good little trick there is go up to the attic, look for those holes, stand at the street. You want to see some dimensional shingles, and then you can do some math based off of when the house was built, and try to give a guess. And then to protect yourself, you can always say, hey, we can have a home inspector actually, you know, tell us exactly or give us a better guess of when the roof was replaced. Somehow the inspectors that I use, one, they literally climb on the roof. It's not this drone photography, you know, mess. Like they're actually walking and examining the roof, but somehow they're able to get like date stamps off of, I don't know, roof collars or nails or something. Pipe collars might have some dates, and so they can kind of sometimes estimate a better date on the roof. All right, so that's my trick for roofs. Windows, roof, siding. What are we looking for in siding? Or what do you need to know about siding?
Several different kinds.
Several different kinds. All right, let's say what's the best type of siding?
Hardy plank.
Brick.
Brick or hardy plank? They're probably match and match, right? Because hardy plank is essentially cement board. Now, for me on hardy plank, I usually say the only problem there is it does still require maintenance. Like you still have to paint it, you know, let's say every 7 to 10 years, depending on the quality of your paint. But as cement boards, it's pretty good. Brick is obviously, you know, is supreme there. So we have hardy plank and brick. What is sometimes confused as hardy plank? Yeah, hard board, and so some of you may even have put this on your listing that you have hard board, or you have even worse, you have hard board or masonite in your King's Charter or something, and you actually called it hardy plank. No, it's not hardy plank. So yeah, sometimes people confuse hardy plank with hard board. And hard board for me, and somebody can correct me on this one too, I put in the same criteria as masonite. Masonite is essentially particle board pressed together, and that stuff rots like crazy. And so I usually tell my folks, that's the worst siding you can get because it requires lots of maintenance and it rots. Anything wood rots. Another one just a little bit above that, so now I'm going from the bottom up, is cedar siding. So cedar's a wood siding, but cedar at least is a little bit more mold resistant, rot resistant. Still requires maintenance, but you can stain it, you can paint it, you know, different things like that. And then vinyl siding's right there in the middle.
Asbestos siding.
Asbestos siding, don't touch. So asbestos siding you see in the older, you know, like lakeside homes, and it's kind of like a tiled looking siding. At this point, I only really see it on garages and sheds. It's rare that I see it on the houses that I'm selling, but yeah, asbestos siding, you know, that'll really freak folks out because you're supposed to have like hazmat be able to remove it unless you encapsulate over it. So is that the best practice on asbestos? You just go over it with like vinyl or something?
Well, yeah,
So
they,
most
they
people do. Or
kind
just
of
leave
wrap
it.
it vinyl.
Yeah, just leave it or go over it.
But you can't cut it, make it, it's what they call fry, but create the dust.
Yeah. What else would be important to communicate with your buyers about siding?
Overall maintenance, upkeep, what's required of it, what you should expect to spend on it
Mm-hmm.
over time.
Yeah, okay, good, yeah, so I forgot about that. Let's say you have that horrible masonite siding and you wanna replace it with, most folks replace it with vinyl or hardy plank, but let's say vinyl. And let's say it's a typical 2,000 square foot, 2-story, 4-bed, 2.5 bath house. How much do you think it costs to replace masonite with vinyl?
20.
Yeah, I usually tell folks almost like $20,000. And as far as I know, somebody can correct me this, I think they just stick the vinyl right over top. I think you can pull stuff down, but usually they just kind of go right over top. But $20,000, and that's a one big chunk at a time. That's not like the windows where you do them one at a time. Now, hardy plank, sometimes people will do hardboard or masonite, and they'll do hardy plank one side at a time, so then you can kind of stage it out. And the other thing about hardboard or vinyl or whatnot is usually there's always one side of the house that's worse than all the others. Which side do you think that is?
It's
North
no
side.
sun.
It gets the most sun?
Least.
Yeah,
It's on vinyl, if it's vinyl.
Vinyl maybe if it's most, but usually it's the for wood stuff, the side that gets the least amount of sun is probably the most likely to rot and have, you know, mildew issues. Another little fun fact about siding is if you're thinking about the whole house and you're thinking about wood rot, which boards are most likely to rot first?
Bottom.
Yeah, the bottom boards, because water whips its way up. And so that's a good thing. You can kind of look at the bottom boards. And the way to tell if it's rotted, right, is it kind of bubbles and the paint's flaking off. Same thing if you're looking at that really bad side that gets lots of shade, you know, you'll see bubbling around either underdriven or overdriven nails, or at butt joints where they're not caulked and water gets in, or around windows. You know, any of those joints have to be caulked. So going back to Kevin's point about maintenance, that all has to be caulked like every several years, because the caulk eventually dry rots and cracks and lets water in. And so anything that needs to be painted or stained requires more maintenance than something that just needs to be power washed like a vinyl or a composite material. Trying to think if I've covered everything on siding. Any other tricks of the trade?
You guys didn't know that Tommy stood for technology and technical Tommy too, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things too, like the more you're faced with some of these things, the more you retain that knowledge and that experience, and are able to then communicate folks. So yeah, now when you're showing a house, you're not just talking about how great the granite countertops are, you're walking around the house and you're saying, hey, here's something like this is probably gonna come up on home inspection. We did a mastermind yesterday on trust. Guess what really builds trust? When you tell folks, hey, this will probably likely come up on home inspection, and then the home inspector that you always use and you know exactly how they say stuff says, hey, there's this thing on this home inspection, and like, oh yeah, Tommy already told me. Easy way to build some trust when you kind of tell folks, hey, this deck is probably gonna get reported because it's only relying on the strength of the nails and it's not actually notched, you know, on the 4x4 posts, stuff like that. Yeah.
What about brick and mortar and cracks
Ooh,
in brick?
okay. Yeah, so anybody seen cracks along a foundation? All right, is that run to the hills and get a structural engineer, or is that one of those normal common things?
Depends on the
Depends on what
crack.
they look like.
All right, so how do we know on the cracks?
When you that crack, you know, if you're looking in the side of the house and it's set back 3 inches in a crack, you
Yeah.
gotta be proud.
Mhm. What else you know about cracks?
If it's cracked all the way through brick wall and block wall,
Mhm.
probably got a structural issue.
Yeah, so if you can see daylight from the inside, because it goes through the block and the brick. What is the brick usually? This is a good question.
Veneer.
It's just a veneer, right? So what does a veneer mean?
It's just a facade.
Just decoration, right? So if there's cracks in decoration, is that a big deal? No. If there's cracks through structure, block, that's probably a big deal. What about if the crack goes straight down versus stair steps? Anybody know anything about that?
Your straight down can be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Stair steps usually not that big a deal.
Right. Yeah, that's what I've been told. Is straight down, that's probably not good. Stair step is more normal because I think it's like the strength of mortar is less than the brick. And so that's just, it's kind of, it makes sense for it to follow the weaker path versus straight. But I think it switches depending on how old the house is. So yeah, cracks on brick veneer foundations, usually not that big of a deal. And one of the best things you could ever do during inspection reports or, with the inspector is to ask them, hey, what's the remedy? And so that'll be a little bit more kind of like during the inspection, but if you ask the inspector what's the remedy, you know, sometimes there'll be a cracked floor joist. And if your buyer wasn't at the inspection, they see a cracked floor joist, like, oh my gosh, the whole house is falling down. We need to get Carl Duncan over here right away. but you ask the inspector, hey, what's the remedy? They say, oh, all you have to do is sister a new 2x10 next to it, and you'll be good to go. Okay, that's a $50 fix, not a $5,000 house is caving in type of fix. And so if the inspector says, hey, you got some bricks along the foundation, you say, okay, what's the remedy? And they're like, oh, you just have to tuck point it. You basically just need to fill the crack in with new mortar, so that, you know, if it gets wet and it's cold, it doesn't freeze and make the crack bigger. It's like, okay, well, that's a handyman type of job, nothing like Stable Foundations needs to come out and do. So, anything else about siding that you guys know or have tips of or questions about? Windows, roof, siding, HVAC. What do we want on HVAC? Everybody know what HVAC is? Okay. Heating and cooling. You probably want those things. There's a V and an A in there, probably stands for something, but heating.
The H and the AC are the most important parts.
Yeah, there you go.
As long as they're
Heating,
operational.
ventilation, there it is.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right, so what do you know about HVAC systems? This stuff, I usually tell my buyers, hey, this stuff goes all over my head. I don't know much about HVAC, but I know enough to get me by. So I'm pretty quick to like tell folks.
I always tell them like, what we're looking at today and what the inspector's gonna be looking at is functionality. So if the 3 of us, the 4 of us, whatever, walk past the heat pump and you hate how it looks, that doesn't matter at all if everything is functioning the way it's supposed to. We can't really walk by anything today and say, man, I hate how that looks. Can we get them to fix it if it's performing the way it's supposed to?
Yep. What, anybody know what a gas furnace looks like? Or how can you tell if it has a gas furnace, other than reading the listing?
It's gonna have a fit.
It's gonna have a vent pipe.
Usually has a yellow line feeding gas to it.
There's a vent pipe, so the flue that goes up,
Exhaust.
and then a yellow line. If it's in a garage, it usually has the parking ballard. If it does, or ballard?
Mhm.
Ballard.
Mhm.
If it doesn't have the ballard, guess what you can tell your buyer, and it's gas. Hey, you should probably have a ballard, it's probably gonna come up on home inspection, so you don't wanna drive your car into gas items. So you could look for the parking ballard, the yellow line, flue. Same thing would be true of oil furnaces, right? Usually there's some sort of flue and some sort of piped line. Oil really goes over my head. I can find tanks, but you know. So most commonly is probably gonna be electric, central air, and gas, or gas furnace. It's either all electric or gas and electric combo. How long does an electric system last? Yeah, 15 years, 10 to 12. I just tell folks 10 to 15 years if it's all electric. What about if it's gas, heat, electric, air conditioning?
That furnace can last a long time.
Yeah, I usually kind of could say that can go, 15, 20, because it's doing half the work, right? You have one system that does the heat, one system that does the air. If it's all electric, it's a little bit shorter. But kind of in all these different things, if I ever give out life expectancy of items, I usually tell folks it's kind of like an oil change though, right? Like, are you supposed to change your oil every 3,000 miles? Sure. Can you drive 6,000 miles? Yeah, as long as you're kind of keeping an eye on stuff and keeping care of the other maintenance stuff. You can go a lot longer than that, suggested 3,000 miles. Same thing with all these years on some of the life expectancy. Just to kind of speed some things up, my other little trick on heat pumps, usually on the outside condensing unit, I guess it would be. Sometimes the sticker, so I always go around the sticker. I bring my buyers over to the sticker, or at least let them see that I walked over, and the sticker oftentimes has a manufacturer date, and so you can just easily see what year it was manufactured. If it doesn't have the manufacturer date on it, usually the serial number, the 3rd and the 4th number represent the year that it was manufactured. And so if it's a serial number that says 0114567892, what year was it manufactured? 2014. So how old is it?
9 years old.
9 years old, and how long does it last?
6 more years.
Yeah, so you're probably pretty good there. So you can kind of do some math like that. Now, every once in a while, the numbers won't quite make sense for that 3rd or 4th spot, but you can quickly Google Goodman and what year is a Goodman unit manufactured, and it shows you different number formats. and you can pretty quickly find out what year it was manufactured. So that's an easy little trick there, and I'm trying to get that as new or updated as possible. All right, so windows, roof siding, heat pump, we're good there. Crawl space, I'm gonna look in the crawl space.
I have a question about HVAC.
Yeah, go for it.
This is one of the things I deal with too much, drives me crazy. The inspector writes, even though unit is currently functioning properly and within specifications, due to its age, we recommend you budget for replacement in the near future.
Yep.
Estimated cost, $10,000, or $8,000,
Yep,
to
yep.
$10,000. The buyer sees that, and the first thing they do is they wanna ask the seller to replace it.
So let's pose that to the group. Can you ask for that to be replaced?
Can,
Why or why not?
you can do whatever you wanna do, it's not a defect.
Because it's not a defect, and literally in our contract, and this is something we would talk about at the buyer consult and communicate those fair expectations of the contract. Quite literally, read the paragraph. It says you can't ask for something just because it's near the end of its life. It has to be a defect. The other big thing on HVAC that I see a lot is buyers will want to ask for the seller to have the HVAC
Service.
inspected. Yeah, or service. Are they allowed to ask for the HVAC to be inspected? Why
No.
not?
The burden of inspection is on the buyer.
Because again, that contract, I mean, that paragraph literally says you can't ask for the seller to conduct any inspections. You can do whatever inspections you want. But you can't ask the seller to do it. HVAC, honestly though, it's one of those harder things because let's say your buyer does want to get the HVAC inspected, how much does that cost?
$145.
It's not a free estimate, right? Like HVAC guys aren't just driving over to your house to give you a free quote like all these other salespeople are. You know, they're gonna charge, you know, $100, $200, service fee just to kind of come out. And then obviously if they're a salesperson, what are they gonna be in the business of doing?
Selling.
Suggesting some repairs, and so you have to kind of watch that out. So yeah, just moving on to crawl space, I always open the door with my clients. If you catch a huge whiff of something, you know, and it knocks you off your feet, you know, there's your sign. Otherwise, I'm just looking for like a real bad crawl space. Literally insulation is like dripping down because it's so actively wet that it's dripping down. Dry insulation falling down, I mean, that could just be somebody who was scooting around, you know, knocked it out of the hanger. I'm looking to see if there's mud right at the door. I'm not suiting up and crawling throughout the crawl space, although I have been known to, you know, crawl pretty far into it depending on the height of it. But mostly I'm just kind of looking around that immediate vicinity and letting them know if I think it's, you know, normal or not normal. If I see an extension cord to a you know, random dehumidifier from Amazon down there, that's probably not good. If I see somebody running like a weird box fan, you know, that's probably not good. But for the most part, you know, once you start looking at the crawl spaces, they're all relative normal.
So, I'm gonna give you some low tech tips here, since Tommy's got all the high tech stuff covered. And this, again, remember, this is during your inspection. Basic tip, bring a tape measure with you to the home inspection. There's 1,000,001 uses for it. Bring a tape measure with you. If you don't have a tape measure, buy a tape measure, you're a realtor. In many cases, if the agent and the buyer aren't at the home inspection, there's a lot of opportunities for things to go wrong. It's almost more important for you to be at your home inspections than your closings. Tommy came up with that, and I thought that was pretty profound, because we want to be at our closings, right? It's almost payday, we get pictures, we get to put stuff on social media, but man, I've heard realtors do everything they can to get out of a home inspection. What happens when something comes up and we can't talk about it competently, you know? Same thing, ideally you got a husband and wife purchaser, you want the husband and wife there because there may be some translation stuff when they get back home versus them hearing it directly from you, directly from the inspector.
Doesn't an agent have to be there to let them in anyway, or do?
A licensed person does.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and again, I guess to clarify what I mean, like, is you know what I mean? Not,
I go to all of mine, I
Yeah.
didn't even realize it was an option
Yeah,
to
it's,
not go.
well, you could have somebody fill in for you,
I
right?
could- yeah.
It's a non-negotiable for me. I mean, I'll skip
Right.
showings, I'll skip closings.
Right,
But I'll definitely be at my home inspections, and I'll definitely make sure my client is at the home inspections. I mean, I'll really, because there's plenty of clients who say, oh, do I have to be there? And I say, yeah, you know, you don't have to be there the whole time, but you at least need to be there towards the end of it.
yeah, that's.
And so I usually tell folks it takes about 2 hours, so I mean, as long as you're at the end, that's good. But I mean, I definitely, anytime I've had a deal blow up, it's almost always been because either I wasn't there or the client wasn't there.
But it's basic, right? If you do the easy stuff, things are gonna end up being hard. If you kind of tackle the hard stuff early, things end up being easy down the line. Inspections are a great time for relationship building, not just with the client, but with your home inspector too. Ask them questions. They will become affirmers of the same things that you're saying to your buyers. Tommy alluded to that a few minutes ago. Believe it or not, this could result in referrals and opportunities from the inspector and their outer circle. You're gonna be there for 2 or 3 hours. You may as well learn a little bit about everybody there. And then we said, let's see.
Dean,
Set-
did you have a question?
Well, just a comment, I think, in my experience, that's where I learned more about houses than anywhere else, because I knew nothing about a house going into it. Mike and them used to laugh at me, but you go to a few inspections, and all of a sudden you can sort of talk the talk, you can, words like, I had no idea what a soffit, like stuff
Yeah, yeah.
like that, and rate more just,
Yeah.
and the more of, not that you wanna be like the computer guy and use that kind of jargon,
Right.
but the more you know about homes and can speak that language, the more proficient you seem to the buyer, more of an expert, so I think
100%.
that's.
Yeah, so I love asking questions of like, if there's something that is going on the report, asking a question like, well, what if it was like this? Would that be acceptable? And learning myself so that I can then communicate and educate to other folks later too. So like, we didn't really, water heaters are pretty low on my list because really a water heater is like $500 if it's electric, it's, not thousands. But anybody know anything about gas water heaters that are inside of a house? What has to
Door needs to be
happen?
vented.
Yeah, door needs to be vented. Usually there's a louvered door. So I had a house that the door was clearly not louvered. It was right in a bedroom. And I was like, all right, I told my buyers, hey, this is probably gonna come up on home inspection because I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be louvered. It didn't come up on home inspection. So I pulled him over and asked the inspector, okay, why doesn't this door have to be louvered? And he's like, oh, because there's a vent down here, down into the crawl space, and there's actually a double vent. There's another vent that goes into this attic cavity. It's like, oh, okay, so now I know it's not just a louvered door, it's just some sort of ventilation for any type of gas, appliance inside of a home. There's something else about gas appliances where like, I think the door has to auto shut. That might be a thing, so ask your inspectors next time of gas doors. So.
He gave you some ammo. Set future expectations. I think a lot of times if you just send the inspection report over to your client when you get it, you have opened Pandora's box, and you could have prevented that easily by just putting in a minimal amount of effort. So what I say is let them know, right? You're gonna get the report and the summary. I'm gonna let you know what to focus on or not focus on, but the idea is, hey, we're at the home inspection today, and if anything is found major today, we're all here together. We'll find out about it at the same time. By the time I reach out to you with the full report, I'll also have recommendations on what I think we should do about these items we talked about today. That way, when you talk with them, right, everything was kind of already on the table. It wasn't a, here's the report, don't hurt me, and you kind of just wait to see what happens. So again, we said it last week, don't be the hero, be the guide, right? You need the guide, you don't really need the hero.
Yeah, and a good inspector should go over all the highlights there with you. I've seen a couple bad inspectors, and I guess my little tip here is whoever you use, keep using that same person basically, because again, it goes back to the surprises. You don't want to be surprised by how somebody inspects. At least know how your person inspects. That way, you just know how to kind of handle some of those situations. But a good inspector will kind of go over the report with you on the spot. And so I tell my folks, hey, you'll get the full report. It'll probably be the same stuff that we already heard tonight or today, and take a look at it tonight, and I'll call you tomorrow. And I get this stuff wrapped up pretty quick. You don't need to let somebody kind of sit and linger on it. Like for the buyer, they get the information and they make a decision. A seller might need to take some time because they might actually get some quotes and some estimates, but a buyer should be able to make some requests pretty shortly thereafter. So I tell them, hey, I'm gonna call you tomorrow, and then when I call them the next day after, I say, hey, did you have a chance to look over the report? Was there anything new or surprising that wasn't already gone over by the inspector? And then we go through thinking through what we're gonna make a request for.
So I'm gonna hit a couple of these, and I wanted you to hit them with the two addenda concepts.
Yeah. So yeah, to the after part.
Yeah.
So that day after.
Yeah, we're talking, they've got stuff in hand, home inspection's done, we're trying to wrap up, give guidance, and some of this is just general competency stuff as it relates to the home inspection. So you've gotta be quick on your feet when things come up. which means you've got to be familiar with the report. If you don't review it, you won't be familiar with it. You've got to understand that in these situations, you're a leader. Even if you've only done 6 home inspections in your career, that's probably still 3 or 4 more than your buyer has, right? And that might even be like 5 more than your buyer has. We talked about how Kev found home inspection reports from other realtors regardless of how many buyer deals. There's really no excuses for not getting the information that you need, and that's really the only way that you'll get familiar with it in addition to shadowing the home inspections. And then Tommy had a really good one. He can probably elaborate on this, but your buyer might be softer than you thought. They might not take the approach that you default to. So you need to know your client. The best time to figure that out is at the buyer consult. What do you think about that, Tommy?
Yeah, I mean, in all of this, you have to be quick on your feet. I've had a lot of agents on my team. They basically want to know exactly what to say if the person asks this question, this question, this question, this question, and it's more like, have you even asked your client like what they care about? And this comes probably with experience of just knowing, okay, when these questions or these statements come up, you know, then that's going to change how you respond. And so a lot of times you're talking about an inspection report and they're saying, oh, yeah, I want to ask for everything. And then you got to say, well, you know, that might be unreasonable. What are 3 or 4 things that are the most pressing? And then sometimes you might have a buyer who's like, oh no, I'm pretty good. Let's just move forward. And you're like, whoa, like I can actually get you. I can get you another like $2,000, $3,000. You know, so it's definitely something that, I mean, you just have to be flexible and kind of know, I mean, you have to know the market, you have to know the house, you have to know what's normal, you have to know negotiations to be able to kind of give some good counsel. But maybe the little best practice here would be, I have a lot of agents on my team that they send me the report after the inspection and just have me look at it to see if there's anything, you know, glaring or obvious, or ask me like what suggestions or what I might ask for, and I can pretty quickly say, all right, this is a big deal, this is a big deal, this is a big deal, this is, you know, silly stuff. So
What about, Tommy, what about cost to cure?
So yeah, cost to cure is actually something unique for Richmond too. I mean, you might have heard some of your inspectors complain about it, because like Northern Neck and stuff, you don't have to have a cost to cure. They just send a report and you figure out how much it costs. In our Richmond contracts, if you read it, we have to have a cost to cure. And what I usually tell my clients is some of these numbers are crazy land. Some of them, an inspector will say it costs $100 or really it costs $1,000. Some things they say cost $1,000 that I can get done for $100, and so we don't put too much, you know, necessary weight on that. But it is required as part of our contractual obligation, and so you kind of want to know what that is. But you also want to, you know, control and lead the experience with your buyer of don't hold on to those numbers too closely. Now with cost to cure, where this is where I had that whole other class on waiving inspection, waiving dollar amounts. It can get real confusing real quick if you said, hey, I'll waive any single line item under $500, or I'll waive $10,000 of defects. If there's a range, $100 to $500, guess what number the seller is gonna calculate? The lower number. Guess what number the buyer is gonna calculate? Guess where the truth is? Who knows? Like maybe somewhere in the middle, and so that can get a little bit tricky. So, anyways, those are you know, probably bigger conversations. The last little thing here, and we can hopefully have some time for questions, is and I'm doing all sorts of continuing education right now. I just did ethics. I don't know if this is ethically allowed, so we might need to stop the recording. But as it relates to addendum and addendum and inspection stuff. A lot of times I'm trying, and Larry talked about this, I'm trying to get my buyer just to ask for closing cost credit. And I usually tell folks, most sellers would gladly rather just give you money than have to call a bunch of contractors to get some things fixed. So I usually try to push to ask for money towards closing cost. So the tip there is make sure when you negotiate, now that this happens in this market, that you don't negotiate for every single dollar in closing costs on day one. Give yourself some room to make some negotiations. But you know, if we're gonna ask for those things, the other thing I like about asking for closing costs is it kind of camouflages what's really important to your buyer. So if you're just asking for $2,500, the seller doesn't know, is that because you're really worried about those double lug neutrals? Or is that because you're worried about the missing shingles, you know, or whatever, so you can kind of camouflage, you know, what those numbers look like. But let's say you say, okay, in lieu of repairs, I want $2,500. Is that an addendum that you'd want to send to the lender? Why not?
Key in
It's
on
it's
the
an
repairs.
easy red flag for an underwriter that they would say, oh, repairs? What repairs are they not doing, and how crappy is this house that we're lending hundreds of thousands of dollars to? And so traditionally the way that I have handled it now is I write two different addendum. I used to write one addendum, and I would put in the title of the email, in lieu of repairs, you know, closing cost credit. I had one agent who is just difficult, and if I mentioned her name, you guys would all agree, especially if you knew the brokerage. But anyway, she's like, you know, you can't put, you know, in lieu of credit on the email title. It's like, yeah, I can, because you're just gonna download the addendum and then send it. Like, I'm not expecting you to forward my email title. But anyways, now I do two separate addendums. I do one addendum that says, in lieu of repairs, seller will pay $2,500 towards purchaser's closing costs, prepaids, and/or discount points. All parties agree to sign a separate addendum, you know, reflecting this closing cost change. And then I do a separate addendum that just says, seller agrees to pay $2,500 towards purchasers' closing costs, prepaids, and/or discount points. So they basically are saying the same thing. It's just one, I remove the word in lieu of repairs. So sometimes I have to explain to the other agent why I'm doing that. And I always just use blank addendums, not the home inspection addendums. That's my own thing. I don't like that addendum at all. I just use regular blank addendums. That all makes sense? So if you're talking, so the takeaway there is, if you're talking about anything with money, lenders are gonna need to see anything that talks about money. And you don't wanna be talking about money and then also talking about omitting making repairs to a house. And in the same topic, the worst thing you could ever do is send your lender the inspection report. So that happens a whole lot. So sometimes at the buyer consult, you have to make sure your buyer knows they don't send anything to the lender other than their bank statements. My transaction coordinator handle all the other stuff. Same thing, and again, this, I don't know if this is ethically recordable, but same thing with, you don't want to tell your homeowner's insurance company everything either. Like, if they ask, you know, how old's the electrical, you say, oh, it's there, you know. It's updated, like,
It's inside.
yeah, it's newer. So, did you get any emails, questions?
No, we're all right.
Yeah, I know we're over, but anybody have some burning questions about inspection stuff?
I got-
Yeah, okay.
I know what you said about they can't ask, they still do.
Yeah.
And that's my problem, because then I get into a head-button fight with the other agent. Who go, oh, but the inspector said it was a defect. You know, and I got, this killed a deal recently. Pillar to post. I wouldn't let him inspect the doghouse.
Those are my hands.
The house is on a flat lot, 1950s, basement. Need to hire a professional landscaper to landscape the exterior of the house and build up dirt and landscaping around the house so that water will slope away from the foundation and away from the basement, as well as put gutter downspout extensions away. Estimated cost $2,000.
Yeah. So the way I would respond to that, same with the other stuff, is I would call the agent up and I would say, hey agent, you know you can't ask for that. The paragraph of the contract says this, this, and this, like, you know you can't ask for that.
And the agent said, oh, yes, we can, this is major, oh, this is structural, this is, this is causing major issues.
Yeah.
Where?
I
The
don't.
basement's shown evidence of previous water, I said, that's why it has a sump pump and doesn't have it.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, in this market, I'm for sure telling them, all right, well, kick rocks, I'm gonna go sell to somebody else. But I would usually kind of first call them pretty quick and say, you know, you're not allowed to ask for that. Now, could I really push on that and basically not ever release them from the contract? Yeah, but do you really want to hold a buyer headlock, you know, all the way to closing? Like, if that's how they are within the first 10 or 14 days, do you really want to go another 30 days with them? But I would at least be pretty assertive on the front end of calling the agent and reminding them of you cannot ask for those things.
I'm just so tired of inspectors giving their own personal opinion
Yeah.
versus true defects. And I've gone to the trade shows and stuff, and I've talked to the inspectors and said, why don't you follow paragraph 4 of the contract in your inspections? You know, I don't mind if you would say in your inspection report, these are things that are allowed by paragraph 4, or whatever paragraph it is in the contract. These are things we recommend above and beyond differently. And the response to me is always, because I don't work for you, I work for them, and I don't have to do anything the
Quick
contract
question for the
says.
group, if you're the listing agent, can you deny a certain home inspector to inspect your house? Maybe just hate Florida Post or whoever it is, can you say, no, you can't inspect my house? Yeah, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I don't think so, I think there's agents that have tried, but yeah, I don't think you can just not let somebody, it says they can do it, they can, you know, have anybody inspect. I mean, this is the best thing I ever learned from, Blakely, which is read the paragraph. Like, if you wanna know about inspection stuff, actually read the contract and learn
I would
those
say
words.
like 25%, 40% of the realtors have never read that.
Yeah, just read the paragraph to see what you're allowed to ask for. Cause going back to that, if you're making inspection requests, what do you need?
It's the full inspection report.
Inspection report,
Inspection
not the uncle who's a handyman saying, hey, I think this is broken. An inspection report,
Cost to cure,
written
request for repair.
written request. This is a whole different topic, but if you check the optional paragraph, not that I would ever get accepted, that you are allowed to walk away, what happens if you submit request?
You
You
waive
no
that,
longer-
You waive it, yeah, you waived it at that point.
If you submit the request, you have to see it through, right? Or you have
Well, you gotta do
to-
the
have
7
to
days.
negotiate.
Yeah, so that's another question, can you unilaterally terminate within your 7-day negotiation period?
No,
No, when does the negotiation period start?
and you turn in all the stuff.
Yeah, so the only question that has always been a gray area for me is, let's say you do a home inspection and you do a radon, and you submit your home inspection request first, and then 2 days later you get radon results. Now when does the time start? I don't know, I would think the first one, is start your 7 days. So I wouldn't send my home inspection thing if I had another thing looming.
Yeah,
I would just.
I thought you
combine
had
it all
to
at
submit
once.
it all at one time.
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't necessarily say in that paragraph that I'm aware of, so. All right, other questions, inspection? I know we're over time, but if we have a, engaged audience, I wanna not answer questions.
I may have missed this, is a dumb question, but I have a buyer who knows more than I do.
Love those.
Great guy. Anyway, if you've gone way over in what you're gonna pay for a house,
Yeah, okay.
and
Like
you
it.
waived repairs under 500 each, I think, per line item.
Okay,
you
so
said.
a line item, all right.
So get the inspection report back, he's like, I paid so much over. We're asking for all of it. How would you handle that?
Did you waive
So if it's, he wants to ask for everything over 500,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
And a couple of things were pretty good.
So, really, we've talked about this in a bunch of different classes. It really takes leadership in all of this. I mean, you're supposed to give counsel and advice, but you really do have to be kind of a leader. There's gonna be some personality types that as good as you are as a leader, they're just bullies, or they just, you know, kind of steamroll you. And so sometimes in those situations, I say, sure, you know, I'll be glad to do that. I just let the seller be the bad guy. You know, on that. Now the beauty, and this might contradict basically everything we just talked about for the last hour, the beauty of the home inspection is nobody can unilaterally terminate, and the seller can't terminate you. The buyer is always in control. So he can ask all those things all he wants. The buyer can't say, the seller can't say, well, shoot, I'm not gonna sell it to you anymore. All the seller can say is no. And then it's up to the buyer, do you wanna move forward or not? So there's really no risk at all of asking for all those things. But I would communicate the proper expectations on the front end of, hey, you do that, the seller's gonna say yes, no, or maybe, but remember, we compete against 15 other offers. He might tell us to kick rocks and just put it back on the market and sell it to one of those other 14 folks. So the best practice, and I'll use that word too, you know, winning with words, the best practice traditionally is for us to make a reasonable request.
Well, that's what I was suggesting, but I had to eventually do that, but we can't.
Eventually you just write it
Suzanne,
out.
sometimes you gotta let them hit their thumb with a hammer so they realize that it hurts.
Well,
you know.
and I said, he's gonna come back, I'm sure, with a different one, and so you've gotta be willing to either move forward or say, okay, I don't.
But here's the thing, I've thought there's no way they're gonna accept this stuff, and I'll tell my clients this, and they do the whole thing, and so like, we really don't know until we sign a piece of paper across the table, so like, I could be surprised, but just so you
Well,
know,
that's what I said.
I wouldn't be surprised if they do that.
From the listing agent side, I've been preparing my people, when you get these $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 over offers, that,
Why would you not, yeah?
well, you gotta prepare them that when they do, if you accept them with a home inspection, let's say you only got one offer, it's on day one, be prepared for them to ask for something, because they're paying you 50 over.
Yeah, well, why not set that expectation? You know what I mean? Like,
You have to.
you know the truth is
It's
coming.
Yeah, really, we should have Shannon Haskins teach part of this class, because she does a really good job educating her sellers on the front end of, here, we're gonna fix stuff.
Yeah.
And like, so when she has inspection comes back for the seller, smooth sailing, because she's already told her seller, we're gonna make things right. So, did you have a question here?
It wasn't a question, it was more of just like a piggyback, because that's something I do, especially if you haven't waived the appraisal, because I've been in this situation before. I always tell them, the great news is that you didn't waive the appraisal, and if you overpaid for the house, the bank is gonna tell us. So let's focus on the things that mean the most to you and ask for those. And I've had really good responses from that too. Cause that way you're still setting proper expectations up front as well. What?
Yeah, ironically, because now it's tight and it.
Oh, nice. Alright, more
Well,
on
that's
something?
great news, you have instant
So
equity.
he was
Oh
so
my gosh.
stunned, he was so stunned after all that.
One thing that I
Laura's got
like,
something.
one thing that I like to try to do too is, one, help build the relationship with the agent and say, hey, this is how my guy's feeling. If we come back to you and we say this, how do you think that your client's gonna react? And if they think that they're like, absolutely not, then I go back to the client and say, hey, this is gonna be an energy transfer thing. It could be a really bad experience. Let's try to manage some expectations here and dial it back what's really important. And that helps too, I think.
Lot of direct communication in
Well,
all of this. you know.
One other common confusion, what is the repair limit in the contract? How much are you max allowed to ask for?
Isn't the total that you're allowed to receive from the seller 3%, like, depending on what loan
That's what-
product you have?
What's the max, all right?
That's what I'm asking.
And regardless of the lender requirement, you're talking about what are you?
Yeah, what's the
allowed?
most you can ask for on a home inspection?
Is there a
Much
limit?
as
I don't think, yeah.
Yeah, good. Sky's the limit, but a lot of people confuse that repair limit of paragraph 24 as how much you're allowed to max out on your home inspection report. It has nothing to do with home inspection, it has to do with well, septic, and termite. So if you read it, it talks about paragraphs F, G, and H, nothing to do with home inspection.
But if
And
you
so there's no
receive-
repair limit. If you're talking about closing costs, that's gonna be loan requirements,
Okay.
but but you can kind of skirt that with money being paid towards repairs, towards a contractor. Sky's the limit. I mean, we can replace a whole septic system, $10,000 and it's
Right.
invoiced at closing. You can put a whole new roof on a house. There's no limits to what you're allowed to ask for. So, cool. Definitely went over, but let us know if there's anything we
Thank you.
can.
Thank you.
Give it up for Tommy.